I had always wondered why Sophie insisted on planning my birthday parties. In hindsight, I should have questioned it. The way she always picked the venue, the decorations, the guest list. Everything had seemed so meticulously arranged. It felt like she had an uncanny knack for making everything perfect, but somehow it always felt off. The day of my birthday had arrived as any other would, exciting, filled with anticipation for the usual celebration. But that night, everything changed. I never could have imagined that I would be standing there, in front of my friends and family, watching my husband of 12 years, Nathan, press his lips to Sophie's, in front of everyone. A kiss that shattered everything. I had believed in loyalty, in friendship, in love. But that night, everything I knew was reduced to dust. It wasn't just the kiss. It was the entire setup. The planning. The secrecy. The insidious way Sophie had wormed her way into every corner of my life. They thought I was blind. But they were wrong. All the pieces came together in that single moment of devastation. Sophie, my so-called best friend, had orchestrated this entire thing. Nathan, the man I loved and trusted, was in on it from the start. I don't know why I didn't scream. Maybe it was because I was too stunned, too crushed to do anything. Or maybe, just maybe, I was starting to realize that this betrayal had been coming for a long time. I felt numb, like my body was disconnected from my soul. And yet, in the midst of that numbness, a fire started to build inside me. A fire I hadn't known existed. As I stood there, champagne flute trembling in my hand, I could feel the heat rising from the pit of my stomach. It wasn't shame or sadness I felt. It was rage, fury. And in that moment, I knew exactly what I was going to do. I wasn't going to let them get away with it. No, this wouldn't be the end of me. It would be the beginning of something far more satisfying than they could ever imagine. But before I take you deeper into the story of betrayal, power, and revenge, I want to thank you. Yes, you, for being here, for being part of this journey. This story isn't just mine. It's ours. If you enjoy tales of justice served cold, of empowerment, of a woman reclaiming everything she lost and more, hit that subscribe button. It's free, and trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next. Let's rewind a little. The restaurant, Le Blanc, had always been my favorite. I'd spent countless birthdays here, surrounded by the people I loved, the people I trusted. This time, however, the room felt different. It felt suffocating. The dim lighting, the familiar faces, the soft murmur of conversations. They all faded away as Nathan stood up, a glass of wine in his hand. He wasn't looking at me. He wasn't looking at anyone else. His gaze was fixed on Sophie. There was something in his eyes, something I couldn't quite place. An unfamiliar gleam, a flicker of anticipation. It made my heart skip a beat, and not in the good way. Before we celebrate another year of my beautiful wife's life, Nathan began. His voice cool but strained, the words carrying an edge I had never heard before. A chill ran down my spine. I had always loved how he could command a room, how everyone would hang on his every word. But tonight it was different. His words felt like they had a weight to them, a heaviness that seemed to sink into the air, suffocating the room. His eyes didn't meet mine. They flicked to Sophie instead. Sophie, standing near the vintage wine cabinet, her ruby lips curling into a smile that was more calculated than friendly. The way she looked at him, like she knew something I didn't, made my stomach churn. I wanted to say something, anything, but I was paralyzed. My grip on the champagne flute tightened as I waited for the words to fall. Nathan cleared his throat, and I could feel the entire room hold its breath. This was it. This was where the illusion of my happy life would crumble. Lydia, he continued, his voice soft but dripping with an unfamiliar coldness. You've been an incredible part of my life, but sometimes love finds us in unexpected places. His words hit me like a slap across the face. I barely registered them at first, but then I felt the room around me grow heavy, like the air had thickened with something dark, something poisonous. I could see it now. Sophie stepping forward, her emerald dress shimmering in the dim light. The same dress I had helped her pick out last month. The same dress she had worn when we shared our coffee, when we talked about everything and nothing. She was standing there, beside Nathan, with a self-satisfied grin that made my skin crawl. And then it hit me. It all clicked. Her insistence on planning my party. The secretive phone calls I always overheard her having when I walked into the room. The subtle glances exchanged between her and Nathan. This wasn't just a betrayal. This was a setup. Sophie turned to the crowd, her voice almost casual, as if she were announcing a new recipe or the latest gossip. "Nathan and I have fallen in love," she announced, her voice carrying with ease, like it was the most natural thing in the world. "We never meant for this to happen, but the heart wants what it wants." A gasp filled the room, but it wasn't the shock I expected. There was laughter too, nervous chuckles from people who didn't know what to do with themselves. It was all so absurd, so painful, and yet in that moment, I realized what I had to do. I wasn't going to cry. I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to let them see me fall apart. No, this wasn't their moment. It was mine. I caught the glint of my mother's eyes as she squeezed my shoulder from behind, her instinctual understanding of what was happening. Her grip was firm, but there was nothing she could do. There was nothing anyone could do. This was my humiliation, my story, my control. The fork I had been nervously fidgeting with clattered against the fine china, the noise sharp in the silence that had overtaken the room. And then, without skipping a beat, I stood. Slowly, methodically, I smoothed my black cocktail dress down my body as I took a deliberate step forward. The room's attention shifted to me, but I didn't look at anyone. I only looked at Sophie and Nathan. "Well," I said, my voice steady but cold, "I suppose this explains the mysterious weekend trips you've been taking, Nathan. And the new cologne, of course." The silence that followed was thick, almost suffocating. I could feel the weight of their gazes on me, their eyes widening, their discomfort palpable. But none of it mattered. They had already made their choice. Now it was my turn to make mine. "And Sophie, darling," I added, my voice sharp as I turned my gaze to her, "it certainly explains why you insisted I wear black tonight. How thoughtful of you to dress me for my own funeral." Nathan looked uncomfortable, but it was a fleeting expression, one that quickly vanished as he tried to speak, his words faltering, as if he were trying to justify himself. "Emma," he began, but I cut him off. "No, Nathan," I said calmly, "perhaps you shouldn't have chosen my 40th birthday for this little performance." But then again, I glanced at Sophie. "You've always had a flair for the dramatic, haven't you?" Every nerve in my body screamed at me to do something, anything. But I held my composure. I lifted my glass of champagne and took a deliberate sip. And with that, the first part of my plan began. The night started like any other. The restaurant, Le Blanc, was dimly lit, its polished marble floors reflecting the soft glow of chandeliers above. The guests, mostly our closest friends and family, mingled with glasses of wine in hand, talking softly. I could hear snippets of laughter in the air, the clink of silverware against fine china, and the faint hum of conversation that seemed to blend perfectly with the atmosphere. Everything was as it should be, until it wasn't. Sophie, my best friend of 15 years, had insisted on planning the evening. She had taken charge of every detail, every aspect of the event. I had allowed it, thinking it was just her way of showing love, of making my milestone birthday special. She had always been the life of the party, the one who knew how to throw the most extravagant celebrations. I had trusted her completely. As I sat at the head of the table, watching everyone settle in and raise their glasses to me, I couldn't help but feel a sense of comfort, of familiarity. My husband, Nathan, sat beside me, his hand resting gently on my back, and I thought, as I often did, that life couldn't get better than this. But little did I know, that very sense of security would be shattered in a matter of minutes. Nathan stood up. The room went quiet. All eyes were on him, and for a moment, I felt a fleeting sense of pride. My husband was known for his speeches, for his ability to charm a crowd with his words. I'd always admired how effortlessly he commanded attention, how everyone seemed to listen when he spoke. "Before we celebrate another year of my beautiful wife's life," Nathan began, his voice carrying a sharp, unfamiliar edge that made me sit up straighter. My stomach twisted in response. There was something in the air, something off, like a change in the atmosphere that made everything feel suddenly heavy. His gaze, usually warm and loving, wasn't on me. It was on Sophie, standing near the vintage wine cabinet. Her red lips curved into a smile that I now recognized for what it truly was: anticipation. It was a look I'd seen countless times before, but never in this context. Never directed at Nathan. My breath hitched as Nathan's eyes held Sophie's, a silent understanding passing between them. I felt a tightening in my chest, the realization creeping up on me like a cold tide, but I couldn't yet place the source of the unease. Something wasn't right. I glanced around the room. People were watching. They were waiting for something, their curiosity piqued. My mother, sitting directly behind me, squeezed my shoulder. A silent comfort, or maybe a warning. Couldn't tell. All I could hear was the rapid beating of my heart in my ears. Nathan's voice broke through my thoughts, the words carrying an air of finality that sent a chill down my spine. "Emma," he said, his voice unusually distant. "You've been an incredible part of my life, but sometimes love finds us in unexpected places." The words hung in the air like poison. I felt the room close in on me. The sounds, the laughter, the clinking of glasses. All of it seemed to fade into the background, replaced by the heavy weight of his words. Couldn't breathe, couldn't speak, couldn't move. Before I could process what was happening, Sophie stepped forward. Her emerald dress caught the light as she glided across the floor, a graceful, calculated movement. She stood beside Nathan, her smile widening in a way that made my skin crawl. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it all, but it was futile. I could feel the pieces clicking together, but it wasn't until her voice cut through the silence that the truth became undeniable. "Nathan and I have fallen in love," Sophie announced, her voice so calm, so matter-of-fact, that it sent a shiver down my spine. "We never meant for this to happen, but the heart wants what it wants." A gasp rippled through the room, but it wasn't the shocked gasp I'd expected. It was followed by scattered laughter. Nervous chuckles from people who didn't know how to react, how to process the betrayal unfolding in front of them. The kind of laughter that made me feel like I was watching a sick joke unfold, like I had somehow become the punchline. I turned to look at my mother, hoping to see some sign of disbelief, some glimmer of shock. But instead, I saw her face, tight with concern, her hand gripping the back of my chair. She knew. She knew before I did. She had felt it just like I had, deep down. The betrayal, the public humiliation. But even as my heart shattered into 1,000 pieces, even as I felt the blood drain from my face, I remained still. My body refused to betray me. I could feel my fingers tightening around the stem of my champagne flute, the crystal trembling ever so slightly in my hand. The sound of it clinking against the fine china was deafening in the silence that had overtaken the room. The weight of the words hung heavy in the air as Sophie and Nathan stood side by side, their eyes locked, their smiles triumphant. They had planned this, rehearsed it, and now they were executing it with precision. The years of friendship, of love, meant nothing in this moment. I had been nothing more than a pawn in their game. But I wasn't going to let them see my pain. I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of watching me crumble. No, this was my moment. This was my story, my humiliation, and I was going to take control. I stood slowly, deliberately, my hands smoothing down the black cocktail dress I had chosen for tonight. The same dress I had picked out to celebrate my milestone. Felt like a cruel joke now. A piece of fabric meant for celebration, now to be stained with betrayal. The room was still. All eyes were on me. I turned to face Sophie first, then Nathan. The words that left my lips were steady, colder than I'd ever heard my own voice. "Well," I said, my voice carrying a weight of its own, "I suppose this explains the mysterious weekend trips, Nathan. And the new cologne, of course." A murmur rippled through the crowd. I could see the shock in their eyes, the discomfort, but it didn't matter. This wasn't for them. It wasn't for anyone but me. And then, I turned to Sophie, my voice dripping with the bitterness I had held back for far too long. "And Sophie, darling," I said with a smile that didn't reach my eyes, It certainly explains why you insisted I wear black tonight. How thoughtful of you to dress me for my own funeral." There was a flicker of unease in Nathan's eyes as he tried to speak. He opened his mouth, but I didn't let him get the words out. I interrupted him, lifting the champagne to my lips and taking a deliberate sip. The glass, warm against my fingers, was the only thing that grounded me in that moment. "Perhaps," I continued, my tone smooth but cutting, "perhaps you shouldn't have chosen my 40th birthday for this charming little announcement." But then again, I turned to Sophie. "You've always had a flair for the dramatic, haven't you?" Every eye was on me now. The weight of the room was on my shoulders, but I felt none of the fear I had expected. No, this was not the moment to fall apart. This was the moment to take control. And with that, I set my glass down with precise care. Every nerve in my body screamed at me to lash out, to throw the glass at them, but I held myself steady. I was in control now. They had taken everything from me, but I was not going to let them have this moment. Not when it was mine to own. "You'll regret this," I said softly, but my words were not a threat. They were a promise. I knew what I had to do. The slight falter in Sophie's smile, the flicker of uncertainty in Nathan's eyes, told me they understood what I meant. I turned and walked out of the room then, the sound of my heels clicking against the marble floor echoing behind me. As I stepped out into the cool night air, I felt a wave of clarity wash over me. This wasn't the end. Not by a long shot. Before I share what happened next, the moment that left an entire room of journalists in stunned silence, I want to connect with you, my amazing viewers. Where are you watching from? Drop your country's flag in the comments below. And if you've ever had to fight for something you believe in, hit that like button, because this story is just getting started. The night air felt colder as I walked away from LeBlanc, the weight of everything settling into my bones. My heels clicked sharply against the pavement, each step echoing in the silence that surrounded me. My mind, however, was far from silent. It raced, spiraling into a fury I hadn't yet fully understood. Nathan and Sophie thought they had won. They thought they had orchestrated the perfect moment, the grand revelation that would tear me down. But in truth, they had no idea who they were dealing with. As I reached my car, the door clicked open with a soft snap, and I slid into the driver's seat. The city lights flickered around me, their glow mocking the void I felt inside. The betrayal, the humiliation. At that moment, they were still fresh, still raw. But beneath the hurt, a fire began to burn. And that fire had one goal: revenge. I sat there for a moment, the cool leather of the seat beneath me providing some comfort, but no solace. This wasn't about emotion anymore. It was about control. I wasn't going to let them have the satisfaction of breaking me. No, I would break them. Every last one of them. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't call anyone. I drove home in silence, the quiet roar of the engine the only sound accompanying me. I wasn't going to wallow. I wasn't going to spend the night drowning in tears or alcohol. I had a plan now, a plan that would unfold with precision, and nothing, not even my own anger, was going to derail it. The next morning, I woke up early. My phone had exploded with messages. Texts from friends, family, and even colleagues, all expressing concern, sympathy, disbelief. I let the messages pile up, unread. I didn't need their pity. I didn't need their concern. I had bigger things to focus on now. Nathan had made his move. Now it was my turn. I spent the entire day locked in my office, poring over files and documents. My legal training had prepared me for this. I was no longer the woman betrayed by the man she loved. I was a corporate lawyer, a strategist, and I had the skills to dismantle Nathan's entire world. My marriage had given me years of intimate knowledge about his career, his business dealings, his weaknesses, and most importantly, his secrets. And I was going to use every bit of that knowledge to take him down. The first step was simple. I needed to find out everything I could about Nathan's business. I had spent 12 years by his side, listening to his late-night rants about the deals he was making, the investments he was involved in. His company was successful, yes, but it was built on shaky ground. His clients, his partners, they were all a means to an end for Nathan. And he had made plenty of enemies along the way. Now, it was time to call in the favors I had been saving, the connections I had made through the years. By the time the sun set, I had gathered a small army of anonymous sources. I had everything I needed to start pulling the strings. Nathan's financial dealings weren't as clean as he liked to pretend. The cracks were there if you knew where to look. And I knew exactly where to look. I spent the next few weeks quietly planting the seeds of his downfall. I made anonymous calls to journalists, fed them details about his financial mismanagement, about the shady deals he had made in the past. Slowly, the whispers began to spread. Investors started pulling out, partners started distancing themselves. The walls Nathan had so carefully constructed around his empire were crumbling, and he didn't even see it coming. But I wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. Sophia wasn't safe either. I hadn't forgotten about her. No, her turn would come, but I had to be patient. She had played her part in this betrayal, and I would make sure her carefully curated image was shattered beyond repair. It wasn't just about Nathan anymore. It was about making sure they both felt the consequences of their actions, the way they had humiliated me. I started digging into Sophia's real estate empire. The things I found weren't pretty. She had built her success on connections, on favors, on bending the rules just enough to stay under the radar. But I knew how to expose those cracks, how to make her fall from grace in a way that would leave her completely exposed. I spent hours combing through her social media, her business connections, her deals. Every piece of information I gathered went into the growing web I was building. I wasn't just going to take her down professionally. I was going to make her a pariah. No one would want to do business with her once I was done. The more I uncovered, the more the anger in me grew. It wasn't just about getting back at them anymore. It was about reclaiming my power, my life. Nathan and Sophie had tried to destroy me, but they had no idea what they were up against. I was the one in control now, and they were just pawns in my game. I remember sitting at my desk one night, staring at the pile of documents in front of me, when the realization hit me. I wasn't doing this just for revenge. I was doing it because I had to prove something to them, to myself. They had tried to take everything from me, but I was going to show them that I was stronger than they ever gave me credit for. As the weeks passed, the momentum of my plan grew. I continued feeding information to the press, feeding it to the right people. And slowly, Nathan's business empire began to unravel. His law firm was under scrutiny for questionable transactions, and his partners were being forced to distance themselves from him. It was beautiful to watch, like a slow-motion car crash. Each new piece of information I leaked causing another ripple in the waters. But it wasn't enough. I had to go further. I reached out to one of Sophia's former clients, someone who had been burned by her shady real estate deals. The man had lost a fortune, and his bitterness towards Sophia was palpable. I made him an offer he couldn't refuse. He gave me everything I needed, details about her mismanagement, her unethical practices, and her shady dealings. With this information in hand, I went to the press again. This time, it wasn't just whispers. This was a full-on expose. And when it hit hard. The media had a field day with it. Sophia's reputation, the one she had spent years cultivating, was destroyed in a matter of hours. By the time Nathan realized what was happening, it was too late. His clients were jumping ship. His name was being dragged through the mud, and his once spotless career was in tatters. As for Sophia, she became a pariah. No one wanted to touch her with a 10-foot pole. Her clients abandoned her. Her business crumbled, and the once powerful socialite found herself scrambling to save whatever shred of dignity she had left. And through it all, I watched. I watched as the people who had humiliated me were brought to their knees. There was no satisfaction in it, not yet. No, this wasn't the end. This was only the beginning. The final piece of my plan was coming together. It wasn't just about ruining their careers. It was about making them regret the day they ever thought they could break me. The day Nathan's law firm removed his name from the letterhead was the day I knew I had won. His fall from grace had begun, and there was no way he could stop it. And as for Sophie, well, I hadn't forgotten about her. Her final humiliation would come when she least expected it. The weeks that followed the birthday party felt like a whirlwind of calculated moves and subtle manipulations. I had stepped into the role I was born to play, the strategist. Nathan and Sophie had made the fatal mistake of underestimating me, assuming my silence meant defeat. Little did they know, it was in that silence that I found my power. The stage was set, the pieces in place, and now it was time to execute the final steps of my revenge. I spent every waking moment researching, planning, and quietly pulling strings. The more I dug, the more I realized how fragile their empire really was. It was as if their entire existence had been built on a web of lies and deceit. Sophie's image as the perfect, successful real estate mogul, and Nathan's as the trusted corporate lawyer, were nothing more than carefully constructed facades, and it didn't take much for me to expose the cracks. The first domino fell when I got a tip about one of Nathan's key clients, a powerful businessman who had been dealing with some shady investments. It didn't take long to discover that Nathan had been involved in a series of risky deals under the guise of business expansion, deals that were far from transparent. Using my legal expertise, I dug deeper, finding discrepancies in financial reports and evidence of insider trading. It was the perfect storm waiting to break. But instead of taking it to the authorities right away, I bided my time. I reached out to a journalist I knew from my law firm, someone who had always been eager for a big story. I had built a relationship with him over the years, and now it was time to call in that favor. I fed him just enough information to get his attention, letting him know that I had a story, one that would bring Nathan's entire career crashing down. He bit immediately. A few strategically placed phone calls, some carefully leaked details, and within days, the story of Nathan's financial misdeeds was splashed across the front pages of every major newspaper in the city. The timing was impeccable. At the same time, I started working on Sophia. Her world, too, was built on false pretenses. She had always been so careful with her image, portraying herself as the charming, successful businesswoman who had everything under control. What she didn't realize was that I had been keeping track of her every move, every deal she had ever made. It wasn't hard to dig up her past mistakes, questionable land deals, unreported construction issues, and even some unresolved legal disputes that had been conveniently swept under the rug. But I didn't want to ruin her all at once. No, I wanted to make sure that every part of her carefully curated life was stripped away, piece by piece. I started with her most recent development, the one she had been boasting about for months. I made a few anonymous calls to inspectors and contractors who had worked on the project, and soon enough, I had a list of building code violations, safety issues, and a complete disregard for proper documentation. It was just enough to cause a scandal. But that wasn't enough for me. I had to make sure that her entire reputation would be torn apart. The next step was delicate, disrupting her network of connections. Sophia thrived on her ability to charm and manipulate people, but I knew that beneath the surface, many of her so-called friends were just waiting for the right moment to turn on her. I made sure that the whispers about her dishonest business practices began to spread. Subtle mentions in the right circles, a few casual conversations with the right people, and before long, her clients were dropping off one by one. The investors she had been working with were backing out of deals, and no one wanted to be associated with her name. Her clients started receiving anonymous tips about her shady dealings, and the pieces began to fall into place. But the most satisfying part was watching her desperately try to maintain her image. She threw a charity gala, trying to salvage what was left of her reputation. But when no one showed up, the whispers became shouts. I had planned it carefully. I knew exactly where to place the doubts, where to plant the seeds of doubt about her integrity, and now they were growing faster than she could control. Her real estate empire, once the talk of the town, was crumbling. I couldn't help but feel a strange sense of satisfaction. Watching them both falter, watching them lose everything they had worked so hard to build. It was everything I had hoped for. But even then, I knew this was only the beginning. The true beauty of revenge was in the slow burn, the long game. And I wasn't done yet. As Nathan's reputation continued to sink, I turned my attention back to the people who had been complicit in his rise. His colleagues, his business partners, people who had supported him without question. It was time for them to pay, too. I had spent years building relationships with people who knew just enough about Nathan's darker dealings to make them dangerous. A well-placed phone call here, an anonymous tip there, And before long, his colleagues were starting to ask questions. One by one, they distanced themselves from him, afraid that they, too, might be caught up in the fallout. Nathan's law firm called an emergency meeting. The firm, once known for its prestige, was now facing multiple investigations into financial misconduct. I knew the pressure was getting to him, the walls closing in on him from all sides. But I didn't feel pity. I felt exhilaration. This was what he deserved. This was the price he had to pay for the years of deceit, for the betrayal of everything we had built together. Sophia, meanwhile, was struggling to stay afloat. Her social circle, once filled with powerful and influential people, had started to dry up. Invitations to parties and galas became scarce. The whispers about her unethical business practices grew louder, and soon enough, even her closest allies began to distance themselves. It was a beautiful thing to watch, like a house of cards slowly collapsing under its own weight. I didn't stop there. I knew Sophia's biggest vulnerability was her pride. She had always been so determined to maintain a perfect image, to be the one people admired. So, I made sure that every last vestige of that image was destroyed. I leaked information about her previous marriages, the shady settlements, the suspicious circumstances surrounding her ex-husband's accident. The rumors about her manipulation of people in her personal life started to spread like wildfire. By the time the media caught wind of it, her name was mud. But what truly broke her was the sudden, unexpected backlash from the charity foundation she had worked so hard to build. Donations from wealthy patrons stopped coming in, and the media began questioning the legitimacy of the organization. Sophie had always prided herself on being seen as a philanthropist, someone who cared deeply about her community. But the truth had a way of coming to light. The foundation's financials were audited, and the results were damning. The donors were outraged, and the scandal only escalated from there. Within weeks, she had lost everything. Her empire, both personal and professional, had crumbled before my eyes. And yet, despite the satisfaction of watching them both fall, there was something that gnawed at me. As they stumbled and struggled to stay afloat, I couldn't help but feel a sense of emptiness. I had won, but at what cost? I had destroyed everything they held dear, but in doing so, I had also lost a part of myself. The woman who had walked out of that restaurant, cold, composed, and calculating, was not the same woman who stood before the ruins of their lives. The tide had turned. I had watched as Nathan and Sophie tried to maintain control, but their grip was slipping. Slowly at first, like a stone rolling down a hill, but soon picking up speed. Every move they made, every attempt to salvage their once glorious lives only hastened their demise. I could feel it now. The taste of victory was near, but there was still a sense of anticipation, a quiet satisfaction in knowing that the moment of their complete destruction was fast approaching. Nathan was unraveling. His law firm had become a house of cards. It started with whispers in the hallways, rumors about ethics investigations, mismanaged funds, and questionable client dealings. The partners began to circle, eyeing each other with suspicion, knowing that one wrong move could bring them all down. And when the first subpoena hit, it was like the dam broke. Nathan's world was exposed for what it was, built on lies, manipulation, and unethical practices. He couldn't stop the avalanche. The media coverage was brutal, relentless. Headlines screamed about his involvement in insider trading, the shady backdoor deals he had orchestrated to climb the corporate ladder. The firm's prestigious reputation, one that had taken years to build, was destroyed in a matter of days. But it wasn't just his career that was collapsing. No, this was a full-on implosion. His personal life was just as precarious. His colleagues, those who had once been his friends, were now distancing themselves from him at lightning speed. The same people who had once admired him, sought his counsel, were now talking behind his back, cutting ties, and distancing themselves from the fallout. The whispers became louder, the accusations more damning. Nathan was losing everything, his career, his reputation, and soon enough, his wealth. He hadn't seen it coming. The walls he had carefully constructed had begun to crumble, one by one. And then came the final blow. His biggest client, a billionaire real estate mogul who had long been one of Nathan's closest allies, dropped him. In a public statement, the mogul declared that Nathan's legal advice had been faulty, unethical, and far from professional. It was a death sentence for Nathan's career. Losing that client was more than just a financial hit. It was a blow to his ego that he couldn't recover from. The press had a field day, covering every aspect of his fall from grace. Nathan, once the epitome of success and sophistication, was now a cautionary tale, his name synonymous with corruption and failure. His phone rang off the hook with calls from reporters, his inbox flooded with demands for interviews and comments. But there was nothing left to say, and through it all I watched. I watched as Nathan spiraled. It wasn't enough for me to simply watch him lose his career. I needed him to feel the weight of everything he had taken from me. The trust, the love, the years I had devoted to him. He needed to feel every ounce of regret, every moment of humiliation. And the best part? He had no idea I was the one behind it all. Sophie's descent was just as satisfying, if not more so. I had watched her, too, as her world crumbled. Her real estate empire, once the jewel of the city, was now a tarnished relic. The investors who had once flocked to her for guidance were now jumping ship, one by one. Her flagship project, the luxury apartment complex she had poured everything into, was mired in scandal. The city's building inspectors had uncovered a series of code violations, safety issues, structural problems, and corners cut to save money. But that wasn't the worst of it. The worst part was that the entire project had been funded with borrowed money. Money she couldn't repay. The construction company she had worked with filed a lawsuit, claiming breach of contract and non-payment. The creditors were closing in, and there was no way out for Sophie. Her social circle had begun to shrink as well. The people who had once admired her for her charm, her wit, her polished image, were now retreating into the shadows. Whispers of her business failures, her unethical practices, and her desperate attempts to salvage her reputation were everywhere. The charity events she once hosted in glittering venues now felt like hollow affairs, attended only by those hoping to see the downfall of the once prominent socialite. The wealthy benefactors who had once written her fat checks were now turning their backs. She had lost her place in the social elite, and it was impossible to get it back. But even as I watched her fall, I knew that the final humiliation was yet to come. The timing had to be perfect. Sophie was a proud woman, and her pride would be her undoing. I had spent weeks gathering every piece of information I could find on her. The questionable real estate deals, the money laundering schemes, the manipulations she had pulled off to maintain her status. Every dirty secret, every hidden skeleton was now in my possession. And when I leaked it all to the press, it was the final nail in her coffin. The story hit the media like a bombshell. The city was in an uproar, talking about nothing else. Sophisticated investors, once her loyal clients, now questioned her judgment. The stories about her unethical practices, her deceptive business tactics, her lies, everything came to light. The public turned on her, and it wasn't long before she was facing investigations from multiple government agencies. Her reputation was in tatters, her wealth dwindling, and her social status non-existent. No one wanted to be seen with her anymore. She had become a pariah, an embarrassment. But the real icing on the cake came when her foundation, the one she had worked so hard to build to maintain her philanthropic image, was found to be a sham. The board of trustees discovered that only a small percentage of the donations actually went to charity. The rest was funneled into her personal accounts. The donors were furious. The public outcry was deafening. Sophie's foundation, which had once been her pride and joy, was shut down overnight. She was left with nothing. The very image she had worked so hard to craft, the perfect, benevolent businesswoman, was shattered beyond repair. I felt nothing as I watched it all unfold. The satisfaction, the sense of justice, it was all secondary now. What I had gained from this revenge was not a sense of happiness or triumph, but a cold emptiness. I had taken everything from them. Everything they had stolen from me, everything they had worked so hard to build on my trust, my love, and my years of loyalty. But what did it matter now? They had paid the price, and I had ensured they would never forget it. Still, as their world continued to unravel, I found myself wondering, was it enough? Had I done what I set out to do? I had broken them, but in doing so, I had lost something too. Something I wasn't sure I could ever get back. Maybe it was the person I used to be. The woman who had believed in love, in trust, in friendship. That woman was gone now. And all that remained was a woman who had learned the hard way that revenge was the only thing that could fill the void. The days following the unraveling of Nathan and Sophie were like a blur. The satisfaction I had expected to feel from watching them fall apart never quite came. Instead, I found myself standing in the wreckage of their lives, with nothing left to feel but the cold, empty void they had left behind. It wasn't that I regretted what I had done. It was more that I didn't know who I was anymore. The woman I had been, the person who had trusted and loved with all her heart, was gone. In her place stood someone else. A stranger, someone who had learned that trust was a weakness, and love a weapon to be used against you. I had achieved what I set out to do. Nathan and Sophie had been exposed for who they truly were. Liars, manipulators, and cheaters. But I couldn't shake the feeling that, in the process of tearing them down, I had also torn something deep inside myself. The thrill of revenge had come in waves, but it was fleeting. It had consumed me for so long that now, with nothing left to destroy, I was left to face the emptiness of what I had become. For weeks, I went through the motions, working at my firm, taking meetings, making phone calls, but none of it felt real. I wasn't living anymore. I was simply existing. I wasn't Lydia anymore, the woman who had once been full of hope and love. No, I had become someone different, someone darker, someone who could never go back. My colleagues at the law firm noticed the change, the way I was no longer the friendly, approachable woman they had once known. Instead, I was distant, cold, professional, but distant, too distant. They all tiptoed around me, afraid to say the wrong thing, but no one dared to ask what was really going on. In the quiet moments, when I was alone with my thoughts, I realized how much I had sacrificed for this revenge. I had destroyed everything that mattered. My marriage, my friendships, my very sense of self. All of it had been collateral damage in my pursuit of retribution. And now, as I sat in the silence of my apartment, surrounded by the trophies of my victory, empty bottles of wine, legal files, and the remnants of old friendships, I wondered if it had all been worth it. I began to avoid the people who had once been my support system. My sister, Claire, who had always been there for me, now seemed like a distant memory. I didn't want her sympathy. I didn't want her to see the woman I had become. I wanted to protect her from the darkness that had taken over me. So, I distanced myself from everyone, retreating into the shadows of my own making. I couldn't face the people who had known the old Lydia, the one who had believed in love and second chances. That Lydia was gone, buried under the weight of betrayal and revenge. The isolation was suffocating. But it was the only thing I knew how to do now. It was easier to be alone than to risk exposing the cracks in the armor I had built around myself. I threw myself into my work, immersing myself in the legal cases that filled my days. But even that felt hollow. I wasn't helping anyone anymore. I wasn't making a difference. I was simply going through the motions, collecting paychecks, ticking off tasks, all while the empty feeling in my chest gnawed at me. It wasn't until I received a message from one of Nathan's former colleagues that something inside me shifted. The message was short, almost dismissive. "You've won, Lydia, but is it worth it?" It hit me harder than I expected. There was something in those words that echoed in the depths of my soul. It wasn't anger or frustration that I felt in response to the message. It was something else. Regret? Maybe. But more than that, it was the realization that Nathan and Sophie had long moved on. They were broken, yes, but they had moved on in a way I hadn't. They were no longer trapped in the past, holding on to the shame of their betrayal. They had let go of it, even if it was just to protect their own pride. And here I was, still consumed by the need to destroy them, to break them further. But what was left? What was the point of holding on to all this pain? It wasn't just them anymore. It was me. I had to let go. But how? I had spent so long building this life around revenge, around the idea of making them regret what they had done to me. I had put so much of myself into it that now, without it, I felt lost. I didn't know who I was or what I wanted anymore. Days turned into weeks, and slowly, I began to realize that I couldn't keep living in the past. I couldn't keep dwelling on everything I had lost or everything I had taken from Nathan and Sophie. It was time to move forward, to rebuild the life I had almost destroyed in my quest for vengeance. I needed to rediscover who I was, to find the person I had been before all of this, the woman who had loved deeply, who had trusted without hesitation. I reached out to Claire, who had been trying to contact me for weeks. She had sent me countless messages, all full of concern, but I had ignored every single one. Finally, I picked up the phone and called her. The conversation was awkward at first. We didn't know how to begin, but slowly we fell into the rhythm of things. She told me about her life, her new job, her friends, her hopes. I listened, genuinely interested, but there was still a part of me that felt disconnected, like I was listening to someone else's life, not my own. But when she asked, "Are you okay, Lydia?" It wasn't the simple question that struck me. It was the sincerity in her voice. She wasn't asking because she felt obligated, but because she genuinely cared. I didn't answer right away. The silence stretched between us, and in that moment, I realized something. I wasn't okay, but I could be. I could rebuild. I could start over. That realization was both terrifying and liberating. It felt like the first real step toward healing, the first time in a long time that I had felt something other than anger or bitterness. It was a fragile feeling, like a seed that had just been planted, but it was there, and that was enough for now. I spent the next few months in a kind of quiet recovery. I didn't jump back into my old life all at once, but instead, I allowed myself the space to breathe, to feel, and to think about what I really wanted. I started seeing a therapist, someone who could help me make sense of everything I had been through and give me the tools to move forward. It wasn't easy. There were days when I felt like giving up, when the weight of the past threatened to drag me under. But I pushed through. I took small steps, one day at a time. And then, one day, something unexpected happened. I was at work, sitting in a meeting with a client, when I realized something profound. I was helping someone. I was doing something that mattered. For the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of purpose, of meaning. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about building something new, something real. By the time I was offered a new opportunity, a position at a prestigious firm where I could use my legal skills to help others, I knew that I was ready for it. The new Lydia was someone who had learned the hard way that revenge might feel good in the moment, but it would never give you what you truly needed. I had gotten everything I thought I wanted, but it had left me hollow. Now, I was focused on creating a life that would fill me, one where I could help others, one where I could rebuild from the ashes of my past. It had been months since I'd last seen Nathan, months since he had been a part of my life. In that time, I had rebuilt, reshaped myself into someone unrecognizable from the woman I once was. I had come to terms with the fact that revenge had been my anchor, but it had also been the chains that held me prisoner in the past. Nathan and Sophie were gone from my life, their names nothing but echoes in the corners of my mind. Or so I thought. But life, as it often does, had a way of throwing the unexpected my way. The message arrived just as I had finally begun to feel at peace. It was simple: "Lydia, I need to talk to you. Please." The number was unlisted, the message vague, but I knew who it was from. My heart skipped a beat, then settled into a steady, uneasy rhythm. Nathan. Of all the things I had imagined my life could become, this him asking for my attention once more was not part of it. For a moment I hesitated. I had no desire to see him, no need to engage with the man who had betrayed me in the most public and devastating way. But then, a strange curiosity overtook me. What could he possibly want? What could a man like him have left to say to me after everything? I didn't respond immediately. I let the message sit, unanswered, as I mulled over the decision. But deep down I knew I had to see him, if only for closure. If only to see how the man who had once been my world had fallen, crumbled under the weight of his own mistakes. I needed to see him with my own eyes, to understand whether the man in front of me was still the Nathan I had loved, or if he had been reduced to something else entirely. 2 days later, I found myself standing in front of the restaurant where we used to go, the one that had been ours. It hadn't changed much. Still the same upscale decor, the same waitstaff who remembered us, the same high ceilings and soft lighting that used to make our dinners feel like an event. But the nostalgia didn't hit me the way I thought it would. Instead, it felt hollow, like the past was something I had long outgrown. When I entered, I saw him immediately, sitting at a corner table, looking smaller than I remembered. The man I once knew, the man I had adored, now seemed like a ghost. His once polished appearance was now disheveled. His sharp suits were gone, replaced by something ill-fitting, as if he had lost his confidence along with his wealth. His hair was longer, untamed, and his face, once so sure, so arrogant, was drawn, gaunt. It was as though he had aged 10 years in the span of just a few months. I didn't speak at first. I simply stood there, watching him, allowing the silence to settle between us. He looked up when he sensed my presence, his eyes dull but filled with something I couldn't quite place. Guilt? Regret? Or was it just fear? "Lydia," he said, his voice rough, as if it had been too long since he had spoken. "You came." I nodded, walking slowly toward the table. The seat across from him felt too close, too intimate. I chose the chair beside it, maintaining a distance that mirrored the gap between us, both physical and emotional. He sighed heavily, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "I don't know where to start," he admitted, his voice cracking. "I don't even know if I deserve the chance to talk to you. But I can't keep hiding from this. From you." "Then why are you here, Nathan?" I asked, my voice calm but firm, the years of pain and betrayal weaving their way into each word. "You think you can just walk back into my life after everything? After what you did?" He looked down at his hands, his shoulders slumping in defeat. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. I'm not asking for it. I'm not even asking for your pity. I just need to tell you what happened. I need you to understand." I stared at him, my arms crossed over my chest. It was almost comical, how the once commanding figure before me had become so small, so pathetic. Yet, there was something about him, something in his eyes that made me pause, made me consider his words. "Go ahead," I said, my voice softer now, but still guarded. Tell me why you betrayed me." Nathan's eyes flickered with something I hadn't seen in him before, vulnerability. "I don't even know how it happened," he began, his words stumbling over one another. "It wasn't planned. It wasn't something I meant to happen. But I was weak. Sophie and we didn't set out to hurt you. It just happened." The words hung in the air like smoke, suffocating the space between us. I could feel my pulse quicken, the anger I had buried beneath layers of strategy and control resurfacing. "You're telling me that everything you've done to me, was a mistake?" I said, my voice now laced with sarcasm, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. "You think that's enough to explain it? You think that after everything I went through, after everything I gave you, I'm supposed to believe that it was all some big accident?" "No," he said quickly, his voice desperate. "I'm not asking you to forgive me. I know I don't deserve it. But I need you to know the truth. I need you to understand why." His words were falling apart, unraveling like the rest of his life. The man sitting before me was not the man I had once loved. He was a shell of that person, a broken man trying to hold onto whatever dignity he had left. "I used to think I had everything figured out," he continued, his voice cracking with emotion. "I thought I was untouchable. But now I see it. I see what I've lost. You, my career, my reputation. And it's all my fault. I never meant for any of this to happen. I never meant to hurt you." I didn't answer at first. Instead, I let the silence linger between us. Let the weight of his words settle. Let them hang in the air where they belonged. I didn't need his apologies. I didn't need his guilt. What I needed was something different, something more than his words could offer. "You're right," I said, breaking the silence. You never meant for it to happen. But it did. And now, here we are. I met his gaze, my eyes hardening with the realization of what had changed. You've lost everything, Nathan. Everything you built with me, everything you had, it's gone. He flinched at my words, but I could see the truth in his eyes. He knew it. He knew he was responsible for his own downfall. I leaned in slightly, my voice low but resolute. You wanted to tear me apart. You thought you could break me, but all you did was make me stronger. You didn't just lose me, Nathan. You lost yourself. His head dropped, the weight of my words sinking in. The man who had once been so confident, so sure of himself, now seemed like nothing more than a ghost. I had won. I had outlasted him. And in that moment, I realized that my revenge wasn't about destroying him. It was about rebuilding myself. I had become something new, something better, and no matter how many apologies he offered, no matter how many pleas he made, I would never go back to the person I was before. I stood up, feeling the finality of the moment. This is the last time we'll speak, Nathan, I said, my voice steady, unwavering. Don't contact me again. Don't try to fix what's broken. Because it's too late. I turned and walked away, leaving the past behind me. The weight that had once crushed me was gone, replaced by the strength of knowing that I had won. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about moving forward, about finding peace in the aftermath. And as I stepped out into the night, I knew that I had finally closed the door on that chapter of my life for good. A few months had passed since my final confrontation with Nathan. Life, as it often does, had moved on, but something inside me had changed. I had spent so long consumed by rage, by the desire to make them pay for what they had done to me, that I had forgotten what it meant to live. But now, with the weight of revenge lifted, I found myself breathing easier, waking up each day with a sense of clarity that had eluded me for so long. The empty apartment I had once retreated to now felt different. The walls that had once held the echoes of my pain now seemed to hum with possibility. I no longer saw it as a prison. It had become my sanctuary, a place where I could start over. I had rebuilt everything in my life, my career, my sense of self, and now I was ready to build something new, something real. It was an early morning when I received the call. A voice on the other end, calm but assertive, spoke words I had been waiting for, though I hadn't realized how much I needed them until that moment. Lydia, we've been following your work, and we think you're the right fit for this position, the voice said, breaking through the silence of my thoughts. There's a project we're launching, and we believe your skills and vision could be just what we need. It was the opportunity one hadn't expected, the one that would take me further than I'd ever imagined. The offer was from a company that had heard of my work during the time I had spent in legal circles, helping businesses rebuild from the ground up. They wanted someone with my expertise, someone who had seen firsthand the price of destruction and had emerged from it stronger than before. They wanted someone to help businesses thrive, not just survive. The moment I hung up the phone, I felt the weight of it settle deep within me. This wasn't just a job. It was a new beginning, and for the first time in a long time, I could feel the stirring of hope. It wasn't a false hope, the kind that comes with fleeting promises. No, this was a hope built on something real, the lessons I had learned, the strength I had gained, and the realization that I had the power to create a future of my own design. I walked into the office for my first day at the new company with a sense of purpose I had never felt before. The building was sleek, modern, a far cry from the empty spaces I had once occupied in my life. As I stepped into the lobby, I was greeted with smiles, with introductions, with the promise of new beginnings. But I wasn't looking back anymore. The past, with its ghosts of betrayal and loss, was just that, past. What mattered now was what I was building for myself. Days turned into weeks, and the work was demanding but fulfilling. I was no longer the woman stuck in the shadows of her past mistakes, trying to make sense of everything she had lost. I was creating something, a legacy of my own making. The projects I was working on, helping businesses find new paths to growth, turning around struggling companies, felt like the work I had been destined for all along. This was where my true skills lay, not in destruction, but in creation. There were still moments of doubt, of course. There were times when I would pause, wondering if I had truly let go of the anger that had once consumed me. But those moments were fleeting. Each new success, each new step forward, was a reminder that I had made the right choice. I had taken control of my own life, and for the first time in years I was living for myself. One evening, a few months into my new job, I was sitting in a cafe, sipping my coffee and reviewing a new business proposal, when I felt a tap on my shoulder. I looked up, startled, only to find Claire standing before me, a concerned expression on her face. "Hey, Lydia," she said softly, sitting down across from me. "How are you?" I smiled genuinely this time. "I'm good, Claire. Really good." The words felt natural, a reflection of the peace I had finally found within myself. "I'm glad," she replied, her eyes softening. "I've been worried about you. I know you've been through a lot, but you look different now. Happier, maybe?" I nodded, the words catching in my throat for a moment. "I am," I said finally. "I think I'm finally at a place where I'm doing the right thing for me. I've learned a lot, and it's taken time to get here, but I'm finally starting to live again." There was a pause, and then Claire reached across the table, her hand gently brushing mine. "You've come so far, Lydia. I'm proud of you. I know it hasn't been easy, but you're stronger than you realize." I squeezed her hand, a genuine smile spreading across my face. "I couldn't have done it without you, Claire. You were always there, even when I didn't deserve it." She laughed softly, a tear glimmering in the corner of her eye. "You don't need to thank me. You've done this all on your own." As we sat there, talking and catching up, I realized how much had changed. I wasn't the woman who had walked out of that restaurant all those months ago. I wasn't the woman consumed by the need for vengeance, struggling to find her place in a world that had betrayed her. I was someone new, someone who had found her strength not in revenge, but in resilience. I had found my peace, not in the destruction of others, but in the creation of my own future. The phone call that had offered me a new beginning was just the start. There were other opportunities on the horizon, new ventures to explore, new relationships to build. But more than that, there was a sense of fulfillment in knowing that I had taken my life back into my own hands. The road to get here had been painful, but the lessons I had learned, the woman I had become, were worth every step of that journey. And as I sat there with Claire, talking about the future, about the possibilities that lay ahead, I realized that I had finally moved on. I had taken everything that had happened to me and turned it into something powerful. The past no longer had a hold on me. I was no longer defined by what had been taken from me, but by what I had chosen to build for myself. The woman who had been broken, betrayed, and lost was gone. In her place stood a woman who had found her strength, her purpose, and most importantly, her peace. The phoenix had risen from the ashes, and this time, she was flying higher than ever before. As I sit here now, looking back on everything that's happened, I can't help but marvel at how far I've come. The person I am today is a reflection of the battles I fought, not just against Nathan and Sophie, but against the version of myself that I thought I would never be able to outgrow. For so long, I was consumed by the need for revenge, by the anger that burned inside me. It defined my every thought, my every action. I thought it was the only way to reclaim my power, to show them that I wasn't weak, that I wouldn't let them win. But looking back now, I realized that revenge wasn't what set me free. It was what followed the revenge, the decision to step away from the darkness, to let go of the hurt and the bitterness that had kept me shackled. The true victory wasn't in watching them fall, but in watching myself rise from the ashes of my own destruction. The woman I was when I first left that restaurant, the broken, betrayed woman who had spent months plotting her revenge, was lost. She was gone long before I closed the door on Nathan for the last time. The woman who remains, the woman who sits here reflecting on it all, is someone new. Someone who has learned that life doesn't have to be defined by what others take from you. It can be defined by what you choose to give yourself. At first, I didn't know what that meant. How could I rebuild my life after everything that had happened? After everything I had lost? But I learned that sometimes, The hardest moments in life are the ones that carve out space for growth, for new beginnings. My journey wasn't about finding a way to punish Nathan and Sophie. It was about rediscovering who I was, about peeling back the layers of anger and sorrow to find the woman I had left behind in the wake of their betrayal. And as I rebuilt, I discovered something profound. I had spent so many years putting my worth into the hands of others, into Nathan's promises, into Sophie's friendship, that I had forgotten that my worth was never in their hands to begin with. My worth was always in my own hands, in my ability to choose my path, to heal, to grow. And once I realized that, everything shifted. I stopped needing their approval. I stopped needing their validation. I became my own source of strength. When I look back at those months spent orchestrating my revenge, I no longer see them as a victory, but as a chapter in my story that I had to experience in order to get to where I am now. Yes, I hurt them. Yes, they paid for what they did. But the person who really paid the price was me.